Hello, welcome to the Idea of a Man podcast with Omar Zach Phillips. I'm really glad you're here joining us for the fourth of our podcasts. This is an amazing opportunity, and I'm so excited to be here doing podcast number 4. Yes, we went through the first quarter. There's 12 chambers to the Idea of a Man. Soon we're going to be doing some podcasts with some very, very interesting and wonderful guests, and we'll have some lovely conversations about their ideas of a man. And we need to have this conversation so that we can begin to explore and examine different ideas about what it is to be a man on this earth. I think this is a huge question. I think that there are some question marks that some of our souls are longing to have answered, some deeper truths that we need to explore and examine. So we're going to start by going through the 12 chambers of the Idea of a Man. The 12 chambers, I'll quickly relay what they are. They are the first quarter, which we've already done now. Who am I? Where do I fit? How do I slash the word survive? How do I thrive? And now we're going into the next section, which is about business, finance, and recreation. And that's really so that our idea of a man can have wheels, can have currency, can have the capacity to actually come into reality on a practical level. So rather than leaving this up to chance, rather than just assuming that we can get our psychology right and not do anything practical about it, we're going to do something practical about it. And today we're going to be talking a few moments about business and where we find ourselves in that sphere and realm and how we can make it all work for us. So whether your idea of a man is a quote-unquote businessman or not, it's not so much the issue. It's about how can you make the enterprise, which is your life, work for you in such a way that you can live a life for you that has meaning to you. That's a saying that you're going to hear me say over and over again, building a life for you that has meaning to you. And so we need to go practical on this. We need to make some practical steps and strides with regards to how we're actually going to get this done. So yes, we've looked at that. So business, finances, recreation. Next, we'll look at relationships, because that's a huge key. So in the third quarter of the Idea of a Man chambers, we've got intimate relationships, familial relationships, family relationships, and your friendships, your male friendship group, how to develop a friendship group. So many of us as men are living out here literally lonely. Like there's so much male loneliness in this world. It's a huge thing. So how do we get beyond that? Hopefully with some of the kind of coaching or men's group sessions that we can have here at the Idea of a Man, we can begin to create some connections, and hopefully that will begin to develop some long-term connections, so that we can have some meaningful male relationships in this world, which I think is going to be really helpful and holistic and healing to a lot of us. And then the last quarter deals with what we may classify as the more existential aspects of our lives, but I think is just intrinsically ties everything together, which is spirit, soul, and body. Spirit, so that we can get some practical spirituality out here, as opposed to simply having our souls trapped in a religious, ideological perspective that perhaps doesn't actually do anything practical for us at all, or even spiritual systems. We might have transcended religion, as it were, got ourselves into spirituality, into new age perspectives, into this, that, or a third thing, whatever it is that kind of works for you. And perhaps it might make some sense philosophically, but does it make sense practically? Have you managed to turn or alchemize even the ideas that are inherent in your spiritual system into something that actually helps you live practically your idea of a man on the earth? And that's what the Idea of a Man is going to be doing when we talk about the issue of spirit. Then we're going to talk about the issue of soul, your unique soul, and the expression that she wants to express through you. And then we're going to get into the idea of your body, because without this avatar, without this physical body being looked after, nurtured, nourished in a meaningful manner, we ain't going nowhere fast. And it's really imperative. And so many issues have to be addressed for us as men, because as men we often neglect, say, going to the doctor, which may or may not be a good idea. I mean, Western medicine has its own inherent issues, and there are perhaps some modalities of health that we can explore here at the Idea of a Man. They give us a bigger picture beyond, say, the pharmaceutical corporations and getting ourselves stuck into those traps, which I'm sure have their own implications. I'm no expert on this. I haven't fully studied all the ins and outs of it, but I have some ideas that there's some issues there that perhaps need to be addressed. So how can we really, as men, get into a place whereby we love and look after ourselves in a meaningful way and enable ourselves to blossom and flourish and grow? And as we talked about in the last podcast, go from survival mode into thrival mode. We talked about that in the podcast. You may find articles on my website about that, But we need to go deeper with regards to really asking and answering that question, and really getting practical with regards to some tools about how we go from survival mode into thrival mode. We talked about the mind and about the fact that we need to begin to use the magician, the archetype of the magician, because we talked about archetypes and the 4 archetypes, which also is intrinsic to the idea of a man, and specifically the mind, which has been used for survival to create patterns and ways of comporting ourselves in the world, for our survival, that we actually need to, by default of accessing the sovereign right to exist within our apology or justification within ourselves, the inner king needs to lead our lives, needs to give instructions to our mind with regards to how we're going to conduct our affairs on this earth, how we're going to build a life for us that has meaning to us, how we're going to make choices and decisions about our lives that enable us to live a powerful, potent, and meaningful existence on this earth. So by getting an understanding of the archetypes within us, taking the archetypes out of shadow and enable them to blossom and flourish in their fullness, we can begin to live the life of our dreams, really. Really, I'm not talking here from an airy-fairy perspective. I'm talking about us actually creating a dream and creating a life that's right for us, our idea of a man, and then saying, okay, this is where I find myself currently on the geography of the point A of where my starting point. Here's the point B of the dream, of the thing we're trying to make come to pass. How do I get from this A, where I find myself now, to point B? We're not going to be able to get there without plotting a course, without actually taking the steps to do what it takes to get to our ideal destination. We have to do the work to make that happen. It's not going to happen by accident. If you aim for nothing, you're going to hit it every time. But if you aim for something, if you create a vision and a dream, and you begin to do the work necessary to make it happen, you're going to be able to do this thing. So that's what the idea of old man is all about, and it's about doing it from the place that really ties in with your truth, peeling back the onion of all the layers of nonsense and bullshit that life, the world, society, church, family, religion, whatever else has placed upon us, getting to the basis of actually what's going on for us, what our unique soul is incarnated in this body for. Why are they here? What do they want to do through us? And how does that begin to reflect and operate in this world in a meaningful manner? So having laid that foundation, having given you a bit of an idea of what we're doing here at the Idea of a Man, having also addressed the fact that we've discussed who am I, where do I fit, and how do I go from survival to thrival, to make this practical, we're going to talk today about business. And I think a practical way to look at this is to use the Robert Kiyosaki's 4 quadrants, just to kind of give us a little bit of a framework, because we'll find that we are, as individuals, probably somewhere on the 4 quadrants. Obviously, if you're entirely unemployed, then as of yet, you may find yourself not yet even within the quadrants, as it were, and perhaps that's something that initially needs to be addressed in your life, unless entirely your idea of a man is entirely to live totally unemployed, in that regard. And obviously that's, again, this is all about you finding and discovering for yourself your truth and your unique idea of a man, however it goes. We're not here to preach, so I'm not here to tell you that that's not the right way to live. That's your choice. So let's start with that. The 4 quadrants, if you're not familiar with them, kind of go like this. So basically, first of all, we have the quadrant of the man in employment. You have a job. Then the second quadrant would be to go to a place of self-employment. Third quadrant is to take that self-employment to a place where you begin to employ others. So you begin to become a business owner. So rather than just owning a business owning you, you then become an owner of a business whereby you have people working for you. And the fourth quadrant and final quadrant is that of an investor, where now you've made sufficient money within your business where you can take some of that money and you can invest it and get your money working for you. So rather than just getting people to work for you in your business, as it were, and paying them, you can now take the money that you're earning and make it work for you. So the reason why that kind of framework is going to be useful, and I'm not sure how much of the kind of Kiyosaki's ideas we'll be using here at the Idea of a Man. I might go back and read his book again. It's been a long time since I did. I'm going to use the quadrants as a kind of a basis when we're talking about business initially, because I think it's helpful for us to plot ourselves on the map. There's I'm speaking to whichever men are out there, wherever you find yourself. Let's say, for example, that you are at the last of the four quadrants. You've done all the others, perhaps, and now you find yourself in a position where you have money and you are an investor. Now, if on the journey to that you never took notice of the things we're here predominantly talking about at the idea of a man, and you did it because you had the business savvy to do it, and the life that you're living may be wonderful because perhaps you have enough spare spondulance, money, dosh, to live a meaningful life in that regard. However, because you haven't asked and answered these questions with regards to what is your idea of a man, and that's not necessarily getting expression through your life, it doesn't matter how much, say, spare money you have in life, that expression of that truth isn't coming through. So now, really, what we're talking about here at the idea of a man, which completely detracts, say, from simply Kiyosaki's ideas and setting down the quadrants, is how do you as an investor begin to invest in yourself, begin to invest in your dream not simply to kind of live the dream life that perhaps we're all kind of chasing in the Western world. I'm talking about the dream life of actually living an intrinsic, integrated life that reflects the truth within your soul, within your unique avatar, within your unique being that wants to express themselves through you. That's a concept that throughout all the quadrants we need to ask and answer. We need to ask, what is it I'm here to do? Whatever place I find myself, however much money or lack thereof I find myself with, it doesn't really matter. The point is, how am I using my station in life to kind of do this first? And if I'm going to be trying to ride through the quadrants, so I'm taking myself, say, from the place of being an employee to being self-employed to being a business owner, if I'm kind of riding that wave to eventually become an investor, as it were, how can I use who I am, the I am that I've discovered myself to be, by asking and answering the question of what is my idea of a man? How can I use this to get myself to where I want to be financially, rather than doing it on holistically, rather than not doing it from that integrated perspective, only to find ourselves in that last of the quadrants, as it were, but looking on our lives and saying there's still a level of unfulfillment, there's still a level of a huge question mark within my inner being with regards to why am I doing what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Because we hear about people who have, as it were, arrived, but there's deep unfulfillment or whatever in their lives and things, and perhaps by looking and addressing some of these areas, we can assuage some of that out of our lives as men. That's my hope, that's my belief, that's my reason for putting out this material, because I do believe that if we'll discover for ourselves what's right and true for us, if we'll live that truth in this world without kind of, the judgment and the, the ideas of others infringing upon that reality, then we can live so much more fulfilled, meaningful existences, and perhaps avoid some of the crazy stuff that fill up the statistics that we all probably have come across that suggest that men are, violent individuals, promiscuous individuals, more in prison than our female counterparts, more likely to kind of be alcoholics, drug addicts, and so on and so forth, more likely to commit suicide, all that stuff, more likely to die of cancer, die younger, and on and on. So taking it back to its natural kind of genesis. So you may not necessarily want to go through the quadrants. That might not be your thing. You might be very happy and contented in life being an employee, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's honourable to do a day's work, to get up and do that. And that doesn't necessarily in any way, shape or form need to infringe upon your capacity to live a life for you that has meaning to you. It may be that in order for you to really live your life and express your truth and all of those things, you're going to need to have a vocation that springs from your organic self, and you need to get to that place of being self-employed where you can employ yourself doing your craft, doing your gift. But it may be that you can find employment doing the thing that you love doing anyway. That's one side of it. Or that you can live a really meaningful life, like by doing your day job, and then funding your day-to-day life that enables you to kind of express all the things you need to express in life and live your truth and live out your idea of a man. The concept here, what we need to look at when we're looking at the first quadrant of employment, is how do we do that intentionally? It can be so easy simply to wake up Monday morning, get up and do our jobs, do the things we have to do, you know, handle our responsibilities, handle our business, handle the stuff we have to do in life, but not do it with any kind of real sense of intention. Not do it from a place of, okay, I've got a life that I'm building out here. If we live more intentionally in this initial stage, we could then perhaps begin to make choices with regards to how we save so that we can fund our enterprise. Perhaps we make decisions with regards to what we're doing within our work. So maybe a course might come up that's available by our employer that could actually help us to expand what we're doing, either because we've got long-term intentions of, say, employing ourselves one day, of going through the quadrants, or because actually this job is perfect for me, but I can expand myself and make myself more valuable to my employer because actually this position I've got, this spot I've got is really working for me, makes sense to my idea of a man, and I want to expand myself. So we're looking out for opportunities, we're looking out for possibilities, we're looking out for ways in which we can intentionally grab the opportunities and possibilities that come our way, and we begin to make good decisions. A beautiful book which can help us specifically, I think, at the employment stage is The Richest Man in Babylon. And I say that because when I read it through, I began to think in terms of a couple of things. One, it's good because it gives us the long-term view. It takes us to the investor perspective, but also because it helps us to understand things about, like, say, working hard. And it also helps to understand that when we earn money, how we can begin right now to have a mindset that makes our money work for us. And so he suggests in that quite awesome book, very simple book, very narrative-based book. So it's a story, so it's very easy to read and nice to read. But it has so many built-in truths. It's like a parable, you know. So a parable has, like, it's a story which has great truths embedded in the way that it's written. And so he says, you know, pay yourself first. The 10% of everything I earn is mine to keep. And by doing that, he says, right, rather than, say, paying your tithe to your religious organization, whatever the case would be, it's a very lovely concept these religious organizations have got of you tithing to them, is they cream off the top of your 10%, your tithe, and they make good money out of that stuff. However, you could make good money yourself if you tithe to yourself. And perhaps a helpful concept, and again, here at the Idea of Man, we're here to preach. We're not here to dump our ideologies upon you with any kind of level of imperative. You decide for you what's true for you. But a revelation that came to me when I began to understand the divinity within myself was, in fact, it was deeply appropriate for me to pay myself first, in the sense of paying the tithes to myself. I mean, damn, what am I doing giving my tithe away to others to do whatever they want to do? Even the Bible says, you know, he who gives to the rich will be cursed. Damn, think about that. And, you know, when you recognize the other verse in the Bible which ties into this is, you know, you are God's. So therefore, when you realize your divinity, then perhaps it might be a worthwhile thought. This is just tying in some little spiritual thoughts here with our very practical concepts that we're discussing with regards to business. To pay that 10% of your earnings to yourself is a starting basis by which you can then begin to build a nest egg, which you can then use for investment purposes. And when you read The Richest Man in Babylon, we're going to pump out some little material about my thoughts and considerations from that great work. He basically is saying, it's not just about, okay, take that 10% and then go, you know, spoil yourself with it, okay, which, you know, you can do if you want to. He's coming from an angle where you say, right, take this 10% and invest it into your future. So, for example, he used the illustration of, you know, you say, I don't know, you do whatever job you do, but you've got this guy over here who is doing this kind of business. And if you say you took 10% of your earnings, you gave it to this guy and said, okay, buy more stock with this, right? Because this guy is genuinely an expert in this field. If I give you 10%, if I give you this, whatever it is, and you invest it in your business, when you bring back a return, bring that return to me. Okay? So you basically invest your money and you let the return come back to you. There's many ways in our day and age right now where we can learn and find ways of doing those kind of investments, where we can invest our money, stocks and bonds, and in various different things, in you know, Bitcoin and all these various you know, new types of currency and other things. I would suggest with all my heart first of all, do your research, understand these things, understand what's right for you, learn what you need to learn, but look at ways in which you could take that 10% and invest it in making your life thrive. We talked in the last podcast about taking our life from survival mode into thrival mode. Here's a starting basis on which we can begin to do that by paying ourselves first, by taking that 10% of our income and saying, how am I going to take this income and invest it into my personal development, into my growth, into my financial development, into my life going to the next stage in my lived experience. Then we're beginning to start to go into business. Another thing that I'm going to say, I came to a conclusion at one particular stage. There was a time when I was going through, I came out of one job, and in the interim between sort of that job and a more decent, stable job again, the jobs I was getting weren't really there was no stability in them. I lost a couple of other ones were it just wasn't working out, and it was a bit of a nightmare. And I had to come to a place where I said, you know what, I employ myself. I'm not dependent upon these people employing me. I employ myself. And I wasn't self-employed. I wasn't there actually doing a craft in the field, but I had my CV. I had a, how do we talk about it in the other book, Think and Grow Rich? I think he talks about selling personal services. I'm showing, here's my skills. I'm capable of doing these things, and this is all written down on my CV. So when you go to your employer, you're selling yourself, your personal services to them, and you're saying, pay me for my stuff, for what I do for you, for this organization. But when we recognize that when doing that, we're employing ourselves more than they're employing us, because it's us that when we take that money, we're paying our bills, we're living our life with what we're getting from selling our personal services. So there comes a deeper level of intentionality when we address our employment as an employee as taking ownership for it ourselves. This work that I'm doing is not just me being a cog in somebody else's wheel. This is me building a life for me that has meaning to me. And we start right where we find ourselves, here and right now as an employee. I'm not just getting up and going to work randomly just because I have to pay bills, because I'm part of the matrix, I'm part of the system. No. The moment it all changes is the moment our mind changes, and we see the whole perspective differently, because we're building our idea of a man now. We're building the life for us that has meaning to us now. We're building our truth out here. So we start from the basis of beginning to take more ownership over what we're up to, what we're all about, and why we're doing what we're doing. It starts with the mind. It starts with our way of looking at it, our paradigm, our perspective, our way of seeing this whole thing, and then us doing something about it, which is doing sort of initial things like paying ourselves first, paying a tithe to ourselves of the money that we earn, and also conducting our affairs in that work so that we look for opportunities to kind of grow and expand ourselves and become all that we need to be, and also perhaps for earning more money within that context. Perhaps there is overtime, perhaps there's some other thing that you can do within that place to make yourself more valuable in that workplace to be able to grow to the next stage. Now, the other thing is about the side hustle. So if you're an individual who knows that this is your responsibilities, you've got bills to pay, you need to survive, you need to thrive, you need to do what you need to do to live and keep a roof over your head and keep the lights on, but this job is not your vocation, it's not what you were put on the planet for, you know that there's a deeper purpose within you, you're going to have to start investing some energy, some time, and perhaps some money into that next stage in the quadrants, into moving yourself from employment to self-employment. And it might have to happen slowly, or whatever it is, wherever you kind of find yourself. The first thing is to begin to set, like I said in the previous podcast, the point A of your current situation to the point B of your desired destination. Where is it you're going, and how are you going to get there? You're going to need to plot this strategy of how you're going to build your life from the current stage and phase you find yourself in to the next stage to where you're going. And then you're going to have to start doing the investment of energy and effort and work to get yourself from point A to point B. So we're talking about business here. We're talking about building your business, a life for you that has meaning to you, a business that reflects your inner truth, the things that you've discovered for yourself when you've asked and answered the question, who am I, and where do I fit, and how am I going to thrive as opposed to simply survive? How am I going to do this? So we're going to look at the business model here. We're saying, right, I'm employed right now, but I don't want to stay employed forever, because in this place of employment, or any employment that I can see upon the landscape of employers, they're all going to simply be my boss, when in fact they need to be my boss so I can live life on my terms, doing my own thing. Like, for example, if I'm building the idea of a man out here, I can't get somebody to employ me to do that. That's me living out my truth. That's me living out my brand. That's me living out the things that really the universe has impregnated me with. So my soul needs to express these things through my life. I'm not looking outside myself to get somebody else to employ me to do this. I'm employing myself to do this work. So therefore, what idea have you got within you that you've been impregnated with by the universe, that is intrinsic to your soul, to your truth, to who you are as a man, that needs to express itself through you? How are you going to take that to the next stage in your life? All well and good having the vision, but we need to make this practical. So therefore, a good thing to do is literally get a pen and paper out. On that piece of paper, put A, and that's your current situation. Put B on the other side of the piece of paper. Put a line between the two, and then begin to think. What are the things that I need to do? What are the things that characterize my point A? What are the opportunities and possibilities? There's an analysis you do. I can't remember the exact words for it, but basically a analysis that looks at the strengths and weaknesses of your current situation. I think it's called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, other, and something else. Yeah. So you look at the situation you're in right now, and you begin to explore what needs to be done to transform your situation from where it is now. What are the strengths in your current situation? Okay, well, you've got a steady income because you're employed. However, after looking at the steady income, after you've done your 10%, literally all the 10% you've got is the 10% for your investment. Maybe you should invest it in your own business. Maybe you need to start by investing it in, maybe you could do half and half. Invest in something that's going to bring some return on your investment for an already working enterprise, and take the other 10%, invest it in your dream, invest it in buying some materials, doing some things necessary to begin to get your thing off the ground, because you're not intended to stay in the position of an employee. You've got an intention, you've got a goal. You're going to become self-employed, doing your craft, doing your gift, living your life, being the fullness of you. So you begin to use your mind and use where you are now to begin to leverage your current situation to begin to change your station to where it is you're intended to go. Okay, so we've done the point A to the point B. We've talked about, as an employee, employing yourself, taking responsibility for your own existence, and then we've talked about really what it is that you're trying to do when you're going into this self-employed mode. You're not simply trying to be self-employed for the sake of it. You're doing it to express your truth, your idea of a man, the fullness of what's right for you, the gifts that you have within you, whether that be some kind of carpentry, whether that be you're capable as an electrician, perhaps it's some craft of that nature, perhaps it's a more artistic craft, perhaps it's a musical craft, perhaps it's literally to create art, perhaps it's to sculpt something. I don't know. You ask and answer that question for yourself. Whatever it is that's coming intrinsically from the depth of your being, let it unfold itself through you, but investing. I'm going to give you another acronym. This one I know is called SYSTEM. SYSTEM. Save yourself time, energy, and money. It's about the time, energy, and money investment. It's a Nigerian term, TEMI. Time, energy, and money investment. Save yourself some time, energy, and money. So what we're going to do, how we're going to save some time, energy, and money. We need to find ways to use those things that we spend. We spend time, we spend energy, we spend money. We need to be very conscious and very intentional about how we use these, as it were, limited resources. We live in a world of abundance. There's so much time, energy, and money around. However, if we're not conscious of how we're living with these components, these energetic components, they can evade us, they can slip through our fingers, and all of a sudden we look back, we're like, we wasted time, or we wasted all of our energy on doing something that was actually very unproductive, or we wasted all this money on something that was meaningless. So by living intentionally, by asking and answering questions to ourselves about what it is we're actually out here trying to do, we can then begin to be intentional about the use of our time, our energy, and our money, and we can begin to build the stuff we're actually out here to build for ourselves, so that we can look back on our lives and reflect on it and say, damn, that's an amazing and exciting, wondrous existence in our life that we're living. The next stage, invariably, once you've got that down and you are now self-employed, it may come a time when you're looking at your life and realizing that, you know what, in order for me to take this thing to the next stage, I'm going to have to employ others. But imagine now you've got an understanding of the idea of a man. You've got an understanding of investing in yourself and being the best version of you that you can be. You're going to look at life differently when you think about employing other people. You're going to look at the values of those other people. John DiMartini talks considerably about values and about, delegating and about delegating to others things that perhaps run into their values, but perhaps don't run into yours. So, for example, I think he says things like, he doesn't like cooking and he doesn't like driving, so he gets other people to do those things for him. Now, not all of us are necessarily in that position right now in life, but what I'm suggesting is that perhaps if we were to employ people to do things that were aligned with their values, so for example, you don't just employ a person to be your, say, accountant, because they have that as a role or as a job, but you employ that person to be an accountant because they love that, because that's their value. When they're operating in that place, they're operating from their higher self. They're operating in their gift, in what they're able to do. So when you get to that place in your self-employment and in your business, and you begin to, say, take on staff as your enterprise expands, if you have a perspective and a mentality where your employees are not simply people who are your subordinates, your people to boss around, as it were, but in fact you're here to help others thrive and not just survive, you begin to take this ideology on the road. You begin to get this perspective to run concurrent in everything you do. What a beautiful world we could all live in if life operated that way. If, as employees, we were actually being asked by our employers, how can I help you get from the point A of your current station to the point B of your desired destination? Things would change across the board, and not everybody's able to do that because not everybody got the revelation. But as we get the revelation for ourselves, we can expand in our relationships to enable this to be possible for our loved ones, for our intimate relationships, for our children, for our employees, and for those that we begin to bring on board on our enterprise to help us get from A to B. What an amazing way to exist. What an amazing possibility. And just by having those kind of ethoses within your business model, you might be able to take your business to another level quicker than the guy who simply sees your employees as them folks out there who are doing all my stuff for me to make me Mr. Big Man out in this world. Now, that might be your idea of a man, and that might be the way it's going to have to work for you, and that's all good. But it's possible. It's just possible that the ideological perspective from what we've been talking about here at The Idea of a Man might give you an insight into something deeper and bigger, which in fact can help you to be Mr. Big Man on the earth and get you to the place you need to be quicker, so you can get to that place where in fact it's not just people you got working for you, but now your money's working for you, and you can go to quadrant number 4 and you can start to invest your money into things that enable there to be a serious return on that investment, and this whole thing begins to expand to a whole another level. But remember, we began to build the investment mentality way back when we were employees, when we started to take away 10% of our earnings, and we began to invest that into long-term enterprises, into things that were possible for us, into exciting prospects and opportunities and possibilities. Whew. Well, you've been listening to Omar Zach Phillips here at The Idea of a Man. This is The Idea of a Man podcast number 4. It's been exciting talking to you about these things. I'm all out of ideas and all out of concepts. I've gone through the 4 quadrants. I hope you enjoyed this amazing conversation. I've certainly enjoyed spending this moment with you. It's been awesome. We're going to have another conversation the next time we talk. We're obviously going to take these ideas further. We're going to talk specifically about finance, and so the ideas we've implemented and talked about with regards to business, we're going to take deeper to specifically look at our mindsets around finance, the things that kind of could be stumbling blocks in our ideological perspective and prevent us from being able to see our worth, our potential, our purpose, and realize that in our lives, because we're here to realize what's possible for us. I mean, you're such a valuable, precious human being to yourself more than anything else. Before you're precious or meaningful to any of the rest of us, you need to know your worth to you. You're the most valuable person in your world, actually, because you're the kingpin to your existence. And those who interact with you are only going to interact with you on that level if that's the way in which you live your life. If you're living and operating your life from a perspective recognizing your intrinsic value, your worth, and how important and imperative you are to you, people will then begin to treat you that way. Why? Because that's just the way we're living out here. But if you don't see yourself that way and you're living from a place of low self-esteem and a low negative ideological perspective, from whether that's been some external pressure that's come from within you, or you've done something that's fucked up and you just feel bad about yourself, whatever it is that's causing that to be your lived truth and your reality, we need to address that wound so that we can begin to look at yourself for the value and the worth that you have. You hold the potential to your dreams. You hold the potential to you living an amazing life. By you living an amazing life, you also are able to help others to live amazing lives. So this is not just a selfish thing out here, although it starts with a level of selfishness. Healthy selfishness is necessary. It enables you to take your life to a place that you can be a kingpin in making life around you flourish and develop and blossom and grow. If we can all live from that space, things can transform massively. We then snap off all the what's classified as toxic masculinity, because now we're generative, now we're thriving, now we're blossoming and flourishing and helping others to do so also. That's a beautiful place to be. And it starts when we enable ourselves to thrive. And we do that because we love ourselves, because we look after ourselves, because we recognize our intrinsic worth and value. We begin to do things like we've talked about in this podcast, where we employ ourselves. We're not just going to work because we have to. We're going there with intention. We're getting up in the morning to do the things we have to do because we are building a life for us that has meaning to us. We're building a meaningful existence on this earth. When we operate from that perspective, a lot of things have the potential possibility of changing for us. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation and you've taken something away from it. If so, leave a comment. Come back and listen to the next podcast where we're going to be talking about finances. After that, we're going to get into recreation, and that will complete the second quarter of the Idea of a Man Chambers, because after we've done all this hard work talking about business and finances, we need to know how we're going to recreate ourselves and put ourselves back onto the marketplace and back onto the field, recharged, reinvigorated and ready to go. So do look out for the podcasts which are coming up soon and shortly. We're going to try and pump out one of these every week, and also ongoing content. I'll be writing articles, I'll be putting links, I'll be suggesting books, all these various different things that I can do to try and get us to get to the place we need to be, so we can all blossom, flourish and develop our ideas of a man to the best of our capacity and ability. Till then, till next time, have an amazing life. Bye bye.